The year is 2013. The PS3 and Xbox 360, long having done battle, are in their sunset year. Rockstar has just released Grand Theft Auto 5, and Fortnite, believe it or not, is still 4 years off. Movies like Pacific Rim, World War Z and Iron Man 3 have also just released. Despite the many happenings of 2013 then, myself and my twin brother are sat bored in our family living room, mindlessly scrolling the PS3 menus, looking for a new game to play. It's good news then, the Minecraft is getting a PS3 version, and it's releasing on Wednesday. It's also got split screen. That means we can start a survival world, play some co-op. It'll probably just be a Christmas obsession and we'll likely drop it in the new year, but hey, imagine all the cool stuff we can build. That was 10 years ago, and our survival world has evolved from a tiny 863x863 block limited world in PS3 to one approaching 50 times that size in 2023. The name of this world? Novaterra. 10 years ago, this world weighed only 18 megabytes and was stored in a dusty old PS3. Now it's approaching 1000 megabytes and is stored in a fancy Microsoft Azure data center as part of Minecraft Realms. The world itself is also playable on all modern platforms, not just PlayStation. It's a world that has been converted across 4 different Minecraft clients across its life. PlayStation 3 Edition, PlayStation Vita Edition, PlayStation 4 Edition, and finally, BEDROCK. It's a world that would see climate change. Hold up. Climate change? That's not a Minecraft feature, I hear you say. Yeah, well, deny climate change all you like. All I know is that the ice caps are melting in our world, and we don't know why. I'm not actually joking, we don't know why. It's something I hope to discover the root cause of during the making of this video. It's just one of the many quirks of a world this old. The world itself has seen nearly 20 people join over the years, whether they went on to create grand empires that went toe-to-toe with I and my brothers, or whether they joined for only a day with a mere dirt hut to their name. They all added to the history of this survival world. It served as a round table, around which I, my brother and our friends would all gather at different seasonal peaks like Christmas every year, whether it was chatting about moving from school to university, or from university to full-time employment, or letting our imaginations run wild with crafting new lore within our world. This place has been a staple for most of our adult lives, something we may leave for months or years at a time, but we ultimately always return to. In this video, nay, this long-form artistic tribute to our world, I'll cover 2 main sections. The first is the real-life background and technical details behind Novaterra. Stuff like what platforms it's been hosted on, PS3, Vita, BEDROCK, etc. and the migration and conversion process between each platform, as well as the various benefits and drawbacks of each of these platforms. I'll also cover stuff like the various quirks of the world, like chunk generation funkiness, or unique biomes available only in our world that are impossible to newly generate today in Java and BEDROCK. Anything to do with the technical aspect of Minecraft and our save, I'll be covering here. The second section will cover the extensive and deep underlying lore of our world. In 10 years, we've come up with some major lore to rationalize certain events, like the Winter Hellion New Irish War of 2013 and 14, fought over the scarce resources of a limited PS3 world, or the New World Settlement Conference held to divvy up new land made available upon the move to PS4's bigger world sizes, and to officially recognise new nation states that have joined the fray. Furthermore, there's the Industrial Revolution of 2022, covering our eventual utilisation of redstone farms and elytras after a whole 9 years of living in the comparative Stone Age. There's much lore to cover around these events, folks, and much more besides, and that's what this part of the video will focus on. This world means a lot to those of us who have played on it for this long, and this is our way of paying tribute to it and recording its history. So please, kick back, relax, and join me as I explore the history of our very unique and indeed very old Minecraft world. So, let's go all the way back to the creation of Novaterra. It was around the 18th of December 2013 that my brother decided to create a world on the newly released Minecraft PlayStation 3 Edition. For some quick context on the PS3 Edition, it was a port of the Xbox 360 edition that released a year or so earlier. That was developed by 4J Studios, who were hired by Mojang to build a version of Minecraft for consoles. The PS3 edition then was released with the equivalent of the 360 edition's title update 13. In Java terms, any world created in this version would be roughly equivalent to Java 1.2.1, originally released for PC in March of 2012. That being said, some extra features and fixes from as far as Java 1.5's Redstone update were included in the PS3 version, but it notably lacked a lot of the Redstone specific features found in that update. As a rule going forward, the console edition would continue to lag behind in updates compared to the PC version, with updates coming out months or indeed even years after they released on PC. So, back to Nova Terra. The world creation on PS3 was fairly simple. My brother chose a world name, which was New Ireland at the time, with a seed that was some sort of phrase, but we can't recall it now. In any case, the numeric representation of that seed in Minecraft is 661120555. To this day, that's the same seed that the Bedrock edition uses to generate new terrain in our world. The game mode was set to survival on normal difficulty with PvP enabled, and he also availed of the option to generate a bonus chest on spawn. And so it was born. Upon pressing the Create New World button, the PS3's cell processor was put to work, crunching the numbers to utilise a given seed and generate a whole new Minecraft world. The world that was generated, what is now the spawn region of our world in 2023, is incredibly unique by today's standards. For one, the continent has a dense ratio of biomes in a small area compared to Bedrock and Java's larger biomes. For example, in a map of this size, you'd expect 2 or maybe 3 biomes to generate in Minecraft today. Instead, our PlayStation 3 world generated 7 separate biomes within this one area. Furthermore, biomes like the taiga, which I made my home at the time, were covered in snow. Today, that same biome is snowless unless it's at a high enough Y level. I'll talk about this more later, as it contributes to that climate change discussion that I mentioned in the intro. Anywho, in this world, my brother would go on to create his own base, gather his own resources, whilst I tried to survive my own separate Minecraft world in a separate save file. At a certain point though, frustrated at having to wait for my turn on the PS3, I asked, "Hey, wouldn't it be easier if we both just played on the same world?" He agreed, and so I joined his world via split screen. Game performance became admittedly a little choppy, closer to 30 FPS than the normal 60, but we made do. Me joining also had implications for how we hosted the world. At this point it was all offline, with split screen being the only form of multiplayer, but should me or my brother have wanted to play solo full screen for a bit, we need to copy and paste the save file between our PlayStation profiles, always needing to make sure that the latest version was replicated on both accounts. For example, if I built a massive castle on my account but forgot to copy it to his account, he'd end up building new stuff on an outdated version of the save, the consequence being one of us would need to wipe our progress to continue playing together. So this was important to keep in mind. After I joined, the world was renamed to Valhedge, representing the name of the actual continent we had spawned into, with my brother's claimed territory taking on the original world name of New Ireland. So we set about exploring the world, trying to map it out edge to edge. Due to the limitations of the PlayStation 3 edition at that time, it turned out our world maxed out at 863 blocks long and 863 blocks wide. Try to go any further and you'd be met by ocean and an invisible barrier. Because we were stuck on a relatively small patch of land vying for valuable resources like diamonds and cool biomes, this inevitably led to tensions and conflict, which I'll cover in the second part of this video. Besides that though, we continued building and playing in this world as the PlayStation 3 edition continued to receive updates. Speaking of updates, let's see what they were and how they applied to our PlayStation 3 edition world. On March 27th, 2014, patch 1.04 would release for the PlayStation 3 edition. This introduced a primitive version of villager trading, where before we couldn't interact with villagers at all. Zombie villagers were also added. This update also added emerald ore for the first time, which could only primarily generate in my brother's New Ireland territory, given it was an extreme hills biome, which emeralds were exclusive to. This was pretty cool, given a common moniker used for the actual country of Ireland is the Emerald Isle. A caveat though was that emeralds would only be found in as of yet unexplored cave systems below his territory, which at this point, given we had done a lot of digging, was rare. Finally, the update added desert temples, desert villages, and jungle temples to world generation. As our overworld was already fully explored and generated though, these structures wouldn't appear until the world size was later expanded in the PS4 edition, giving us access to new, unexplored terrain. Besides this update, other updates only really covered minor things like crafting recipes or general bug fixes. The next update of major consequence for our world would come on September 11th, 2014, patch 1.07. This added the ability to transfer our world to Minecraft PlayStation 4 Edition and Minecraft PlayStation Vita Edition, which both had released only a few days earlier. We would now be able to upload our save to 4J Studios servers, where it could be downloaded and converted to either the PS4 or PS Vita edition. This would also mark the end of Novaterra's PS3 era and see it jump to new generation consoles, a move of massive consequence for the world. Before we cover the conversion of our world to next generation consoles, let's level set on our progress in the PlayStation 3 edition. As of September 2014, we hadn't yet set foot in the end dimension, but we had generated most available nether chunks. As you can see, the edges of the nether, including the roof and the floor, were made of bedrock that prevent you from generating more chunks than the PS3 could handle. The size of the nether on the PlayStation 3 edition was roughly 280 blocks by 280 blocks. This meant that, unlike today's versions of Minecraft where one nether block is equivalent to 8 overworld blocks, the ratio in our world was closer to 3 nether blocks to 1 overworld block. This meant that things such as nether highways made to shorten trips across the overworld weren't as lucrative in the PlayStation 3 edition. In any case, our nether at the time was actually quite boring. This was a world generated before 2020's nether update, and so there was only one biome, the nether wastes. We had none of this fancy stuff like crimson forests, soul sand valleys, ancient debris, or even netherite. The only reason you'd really visit the nether in those days was for the thrill of raiding an admittedly bare nether fortress, or maybe for some glowstone. And on that note, even our overworld was totally barren compared to worlds generated today. I had mentioned an update before that gave villagers basic trading abilities, but no village had even generated in our PlayStation 3 edition world. There was a single well that had generated in a desert, which indicated a village was meant to spawn, but hadn't due to a bug of some sort. Furthermore, the terrain was all fairly flat and the biomes were pretty basic. This was way before the time of caves and cliffs, of course. So to summarise then, the only structure that had generated in our PlayStation 3 edition world was an underground stronghold made for access to the end dimension. And myself and my brother didn't even know that existed at the time. No other structures generated in our world. No undersea temples, no villages, no pillager outposts, no woodland mansions, nothing. Just me, my brother, and the great outdoors. On that note, it is interesting travelling from spawn in our world today, out a few thousand blocks to generate new chunks. In a way, you get to see the progression of Minecraft itself, as you travel from a basic patch of land at spawn out to new terrain that feature awe-inspiring caves, cliffs, and structures. But I digress. Let's get back to converting our world to next generation consoles. In late 2014, both the PlayStation 4 edition and PlayStation Vita edition of Minecraft would release. Now, the difference between these versions and the PlayStation 3 edition that we were already playing was actually pretty minimal. Unlike the Java and Bedrock editions of Minecraft today, which are both written in completely different coding languages and are, at a coding level, two completely different games, the three PlayStation versions of Minecraft were simply minor forks of the exact same codebase. That is to say, the only difference between them were minor configuration changes such as world size options and controls, and slight code and optimization changes so that the code would work with each PlayStation platform. But were you to compare the code of each version, PlayStation 3, Vita and PS4, 90% of that code would read exactly the same. So, let's cover the conversion to the PlayStation Vita edition first, as it's the most simple. The PlayStation Vita edition was, for all intents and purposes, the exact same as the PlayStation 3 edition. Same world size, same features, same entity limits. The only difference was a smaller draw distance on Vita and a slightly lower player cap of 4 for multiplayer games versus 8 on PS3. Performance on Vita was admittedly a little bit more hitchy as well. So like I said, world conversion to Vita was pretty simple. You just went to your PS3 Worlds menu, hit the R1 button and chose the option to upload your world to 4J Studios cloud servers. On PlayStation Vita, you'd then hit the square button to download that same world and bam, world converted. It's worth noting, no fancy conversions to the raw save file were happening here. For example, if you try to convert a Java save to Bedrock, or vice versa, the formats are so different that a lot of operations have to be performed to resolve these differences. Kind of like translating a language, and some weird bugs can result. Things, as they say, get lost in translation. For the PlayStation editions of Minecraft, the raw save file stays the same as it's effectively the same code reading the save file. The only conversion that's needed in this case is downloading the world and creating a new PS Vita format save file from it. The core save file stays the exact same. It's worth noting also that save transfer between Vita and PS3 were two-way, meaning you could move your save back and forth between those two platforms. This was as opposed to moving the world to the PS4 edition, where it couldn't be moved back to PS3 or Vita once converted to the PlayStation 4 edition. So, in conclusion, what effect did the PS Vita edition have on our world? None really, apart from being able to take our world on the go. World conversion to the PS4 edition, however, would have a much bigger impact on Novaterra. The long-awaited day had finally arrived. On September the 11th, 2014, we converted our PlayStation 3 world over to PlayStation 4. The process for converting our world from PlayStation 3 to PlayStation 4 was exactly the same as the one that I had described between Vita and PS3. However, there was one important difference: world size. As I said before, our PlayStation 3 world was 863 blocks long and 863 blocks wide. The PlayStation 4 edition, however, allowed for world sizes of 35 times that. 5,120 blocks by 5,120 blocks. This was a massive increase. The Nether would also increase in size from 280 blocks by 280 blocks on PlayStation 3 to 640 blocks by 640 blocks on PlayStation 4. This was a much smaller increase granted, but one that set the Nether to overworld block ratio at 1:8, the same as PC, instead of the 1:3 ratio that it was on PlayStation 3. So, once our world was converted to PlayStation 4, we were granted the option to increase the size of our world, and increase it we did. It was simply a matter of digging into the world options and moving the world size slider up from classic to large. There was also an option to override our world edges to smooth the transition to new terrain, but we chose not to do this in case some of our builds were overwritten. Remember how I said the edges of our overworld on PS3 originally consisted of ocean and an invisible barrier? That ocean remained on PlayStation 4, but new land containing new structures and terrain could then be generated beyond it. Interestingly, our world contained a curious relic of this world size increase. The invisible PS3 world barrier that originally surrounded Valhedge, our home continent, was replaced by two perfectly square physical barriers, one inside the other. They don't impede travel at all, being below the ocean, but they're a cool reminder of the limits we used to operate within on PlayStation 3. Weirdly, no such barrier remnant was found in the Nether. The bedrock walls simply disappeared, leading to new chunks. So, did we immediately map out the entire world on the move to PS4? No, actually. Why not, I hear you ask? Well, if we had, we'd ironically be limiting ourselves. Updates like Update Aquatic, Village and Pillage, and more hadn't released yet in 2014. These contained cool new structures like updated villages, new ocean biomes, and more. We wanted to leave most of our terrain ungenerated so that when these future updates did arrive, we could avail of the features within them by exploring ungenerated chunks. In that spirit, we took the measure of setting up an Imperial Settlement Conference, which I'll talk more about in the second part of this video, to make joint, server-wide decisions on what terrain to explore, who would own said terrain, and what terrain was to be left unexplored for future updates. These conferences involved myself and my brother, and would later involve others who would join the server. The result of this prudent diplomacy would be that, despite our world remaining limited in size on PS4, there would be opportunities to generate new Minecraft terrain for more than half a decade to come. One other big change to note in the move to PS4 was draw distance. It nearly doubled, from 10 chunks on PS3 to a staggering 18 chunks on PS4. For reference, today's Minecraft Realms, on Bedrock at least, supports only 12 chunks of draw distance, and until recently, it was only 10. This new PS4 edition draw distance was great, with the caveat that it made the move to Minecraft Bedrock Realms 6 years later feel like a massive downgrade. The move to PS4 would also be the first time that players would join our world online, and not just through split screen. Novaterra had enough history at this point that some of our friends were interested in joining. So, how was our server hosted, so to speak? Well, it just so happened that our world was converted to PlayStation 4 under my PlayStation Network account, and so the world technically fell under my ownership, ironic as the world was originally created by my brother. For the console version of Minecraft at the time, there were no dedicated servers at all, nothing like Minecraft Realms today. Only the ability to invite your friends to a world you were already playing on in that moment. What this meant in practice was that I had to be both online and playing Minecraft for my friends to join the world. Say my friend wanted to continue building a castle in Novaterra. Am I offline? Tough luck, no Minecraft for you. Am I online but playing a different game? Tough luck, check back later. What this resulted in was my PS4 effectively becoming a dedicated server for our world. Anytime I wasn't playing the PlayStation 4, I would leave it running our Minecraft world with invites pre-sent to all members of the server. It's why, according to Sony, Minecraft is supposedly my most played game to this day, even though my actual playtime is dwarfed by other games. I can recall so many scenarios, particularly in later years when I was at university, when my phone would light up with, "Put up the server," or worse still, "The server crashed, reboot it." These requests were often made in vain, as I was likely out at a bar too far from my PlayStation 4 to address the wailing and gnashing of teeth of Novaterra's constituents. This inflexible and rigid form of server hosting would give rise to a deep and long-running desire to somehow host our world on an actual persistent server, where people could drop in and out as they pleased. Unfortunately, such a reality wouldn't be possible for years, half a decade in fact. In desperation, I would try to decrypt our PS4 save to a PC-friendly format in order to convert our world to Java, where server hosting on services like Realms was possible. Unfortunately, this ended up being impossible. Even when PlayStation did later get access to Bedrock Edition, which contained a solution for this problem in the form of Minecraft Realms, we wouldn't be able to utilize them until a year after Bedrock's release on PS4. This was due to PlayStation Realms being delayed. This Bedrock Realms purgatory, where our world was ported to Bedrock but couldn't be hosted in Realms nor transferred to any other platform, was a whole saga in itself. It was probably Novaterra's lowest point as far as world stability, confidence and player count were concerned. As such, I'll be covering it later in this section. Anyway, I digress. Back to the PlayStation 4 edition. The initial world conversion to PS4 was a little stumped at first. Myself and my brother were dismayed to find that saving wasn't working correctly on PS3 imported worlds. Kind of. If you broke a block on the PlayStation 4 edition or built a house, that world progress would be saved no problem. However, your character progress wouldn't be. I actually illustrated this in a video I sent to 4J Studios at the time to help them diagnose the issue. In a nutshell, if you loaded up the world, dumped your inventory on the ground, and moved to a different spot, these character-specific changes wouldn't be saved. It was essentially a free duplication glitch, as you can see, albeit one we didn't take advantage of. So yeah, a little annoying, but it didn't stop us playing. We just have to ensure to store newly gained items in chests, lest they be lost to our glitched inventories. Thankfully, this issue would end up being fixed in a future update. Speaking of updates, let's see how Novaterra evolved under the stewardship of the PS4 edition. PS4 edition patch 1.02, released on the 2nd of October 2014, fixed that save bug I was just talking about, plus a bunch of other bug fixes. On December 20th of 2014, we got patch 1.12, which generally caught us up to Java 1.6.4, originally released over a year earlier on PC. This update added a bunch of new redstone blocks and tools, such as daylight sensors, activator rails, redstone comparators, and more. It would be another 7 or 8 years before our world's industrial revolution would prompt us to take advantage of these tools, however. It also added witch huts to world generation, which would now be able to generate given the vast unexplored terrain we now had access to on PlayStation 4 edition. That being said, I've never seen a witch hut myself, but I'm sure there's one somewhere in Novaterra given how large it is today. Finally, the update added the Wither, which wasn't a threat we'd confront as a server for another couple of years. You might find yourself asking, no redstone contraptions, no wither kills, just what were you guys doing in Novaterra for all these years? In a nutshell, we didn't care for these deeper parts of Minecraft at the time. We really just focused on building, exploring, kicking off diplomatic incidents, and generally just finding things out for ourselves. It wouldn't be until later years that we begin to explore the further reaches of the game. Finally, this update will add wither skeletons, donkeys, mules, bats, and horses. So, things are looking pretty good, right? Novaterra has successfully moved to PS4, we're beginning to settle new lands, generating new features and terrain, getting plenty of updates. Why, nothing could possibly ruin all of the fun we're having. That's unfortunately where you're wrong. In early January of 2015, tragedy would strike. After working on my little slice of Valhedge, I go to save and quit the game. I'm actually getting pretty hungry at this point, so I figure that once the game saves, I'll maybe go grab myself a snack. Huh, this is taking a while, I thought. I'll go grab that snack now and come back. Huh, this isn't good, I mused to myself, slightly more concerned at this point. I'll just leave it for an hour or so. I definitely don't want to do a hard reset and potentially corrupt my save. Okay, this is getting ridiculous. I'm sure if I hard reset just this once, it'll be fine. Yeah, it should be grand. There's no way the world will get corrupted. Let's be clear, the world was still playable after corruption, but the damage done was devastating. Whole swathes of territory were wiped, paths, buildings, structures, even underground railways were blipped from existence. Other buildings that sat on chunk boundaries were sliced in half. A few wolves I owned were blipped out of existence also. I sometimes wonder if they're lurking in some corrupted sector of the save file today, still looking for a way back to Nova Terra. But I digress. Think of this as our world's Thanos snap. Except instead of half the population disappearing, it was more half of the stuff I had built. Funnily enough, this only affected my territory. My brother's builds all remained intact. The reason this happened was because of a funny way that Minecraft PlayStation Edition handled save files. In Bedrock or Java Edition, if you clear a forest to build a house, that's saved. If you load that same area later, no trees are loaded because you've cleared the forest. Only the house you've built is loaded. Well, on the PlayStation Edition, it works a bit differently. When you save the game, the client will take the original world, trees and all, and calculate how different it is now to when it was first generated on spawn. So, where you'd save your game, the client would regenerate the trees in that forest from scratch, calculate that you'd chop them down and build a house on that spot, and save that information. An easier way to explain it is that whilst Bedrock and Java Edition save your world as is, the PlayStation Edition saves only the information that's different between your world when first generated and your world now. The result is that save files were kept a lot smaller on console, an important priority for 4J Studios. World sizes were limited on console for a reason, after all. So, the Cursed Cleansing, the name we ended up giving to this horrible event, was caused by the following. While saving the game and calculating the differences between our originally generated world and our world up to this point, the PlayStation 4 edition crashed. As a result, the game didn't get to calculate the differences of all the chunks in our world, only some, and as a result, defaulted a bunch of chunks to their original state back when they were first generated. That is to say, a bunch of changes we had made to the world, buildings, paths, railways and such, were lost. This would be one of Nova Terra's most pivotal moments. The material and territorial advantage I had over my brother's nation collapsed, and he quickly moved into my territory to stake his claim. Powerless and without any resources, I would escape to an outlying island in newly generated territory known as Outer Haven. This is another matter I'll cover in the second part of the video, but suffice it to say the world was certainly shaken up, and sadly, a lot of history was lost. Speaking of history, it's always important to catalogue it, especially after devastating events such as this. That's why we were happy to see PlayStation 4 Edition 1.17 released on the 1st of July 2015. This would add, among other things, the Book and Quill, allowing us to document matters such as past trades and correspondence between nations, or indeed the history and lore of our world as a whole. On December 18th, 2015, we'd get the equivalent of Java 1.8's Bountiful update. For the first time, we'd be able to generate ocean monuments in Nova Terra, a structure which the nation of O'Hara, led by a friend of ours, would discover in 2017 and eventually raid alongside the nations of New Ireland and Arundel. There they'd go face to face with the newly added mobs in this update, such as Guardians and Elder Guardians. Jumping forward a bit, on October 6th, 2016, version 1.36 would release for PlayStation 4. This would add a few items of note such as the banner and decorative stuff such as red nether bricks. Interestingly, fossils and igloos would be added to world generation, but only for new worlds. A weird distinction given all the new structures and terrain up until now could be generated in Nova Terra, so long as it was in as of yet ungenerated chunks. In any case, it wasn't a huge loss, and we got polar bears to make up for it. Only 2 months later, on the 21st of December 2016, we'd received the equivalent of Java 1.10. This would be an end dimension focused update, adding stuff like end cities, the elytra, shulkers, and an end gateway to gain access to all of this stuff. Another update, patch 1.50, released on May 30th of 2017, would add other end items such as shulker boxes and shulker shells. Like I said before, we were focused on overworld matters at this time and didn't do much advanced stuff like raiding the end dimension. In fact, we wouldn't go up against the Ender Dragon until summer of 2022. In fairness though, we only waited so long because we wanted a good chunk of the server's players on at once for the event, It is, after all, not always easy to pencil everyone in for the same date. Speaking of the End Dimension, Nova Terra's version was really only rated when we had made the move to Bedrock Edition, but it's worth noting just how quirky the original PlayStation Edition's End Dimension was. The first thing of note were 4J's changes to the Ender Dragon boss fight for the console edition. They added iron bars around the end crystals, so it was no longer just a case of shooting them with a bow and arrow from a distance, you had to get up close. Furthermore, 4J Studios gave the Ender Dragon unique attacks to make the fight a little more interesting. So impressed were Mojang with these changes, they made the decision to port them over to PC's Java edition shortly after, one of the rare cases of features being ported from console edition to PC. Additionally, the console edition version of the End wasn't infinite like it is in today's Bedrock and Java editions. In fact, the size of the explorable End Dimension was only as big as the main End Island. You couldn't even build bridges outwards without immediately hitting an invisible wall. But what about outer End Islands, I hear you ask? How would you get an Elytra back in the day? Well, an End Gateway would appear after killing the Ender Dragon, just as normal, but this would transport you to a small outer End Island with a guaranteed End City and ship right in front of you. No other End Islands would spawn, and you couldn't generate more than one End Gateway. Essentially, you only had access to one End City and one Elytra per survival world. This wasn't great, right? What if the whole squad wanted an Elytra? Well, worry not. All you needed to do was go to your world options and select the option to regenerate the End. This would wipe all progress in your End Dimension and respawn the Ender Dragon, allowing you to get as many Elytras and indeed other materials as you desired. It's worth noting this option also existed for the Nether, should you have wanted to take advantage of new Nether specific blocks added in future patches. Again though, it would wipe all of your progress in that dimension, so any builds you created would be wiped. Sometime during 2015, we had regenerated the Nether ourselves for reasons I can't really recall. It's remained the same since, however, with the only difference being the move to Bedrock Edition, making our Nether dimension infinite in size. Continuing on, June 27th of 2017 would introduce another massive update, which would prompt all members of the server to explore new chunks to generate exciting new structures. This was patch 1.52, roughly equivalent to Java 1.11's exploration update released 7 months prior. This added lots of cool stuff, including woodland mansions and everything that came with them. Evokers, Vindicators, Llamas, Parrots, and more. The allure of finding a woodland mansion prompted a second major Imperial settlement conference to be held, including the Inquisition, which was my nation at the time, Arundel, O'Hara, and my brother's nation of the United Lands of New Ireland. We each agreed a 1 map's worth expansion of each of our nations in which to generate new chunks and find this fabled woodland mansion. There would go on to be a woodland mansion scare or two where existing builds, spotted at a distance by foreign nations, were believed to be woodland mansions, prompting emergency meetings and subsequent expeditions. Of course, there was much disgruntlement when these turned out to be nothing more than normal player-made builds. Luckily, I would come across a woodland mansion myself, just south of Valhedge, and would make it my main base, which it continues to be to this day. So, let's jump forward to September 11th, 2018. A mere 4 months after Java Edition received the update, the PlayStation 4 Edition received Update Aquatic. Ironically enough, despite this update being a relatively quick turnaround from the Java Edition by 4J Studios, I recall myself, my brother and our friends complaining the loudest of all updates at how long the delay between PC and console was taking. Anyway, this update added shipwrecks, underwater ruins, coral reefs, icebergs, buried treasure, and so much more to world generation. Curiously, this wouldn't prompt the same ravenous desire to explore new chunks among server members as the Woodland Mansion did, probably because all these new structures were underwater, so no new Imperial Settlement Conference was convened. That being said, some new chunks were generated to the south, giving us a glimpse into the fancy new update. There would be some admittedly sharp terrain contrast between old and new chunks when this was done, with early PS4 era world generation clashing with Update Aquatics, but nothing dreadful. The last of the big headline updates to hit Nova Terra during its PS4 edition tenure would be the Village and Pillage update. Patches 1.81 through 1.91, which spanned between December 18th, 2018 and June 3rd, 2019, would all incrementally add all of the Village and Pillage features found in the mainline update on PC. This added a lot of functional changes to existing villages we had discovered, such as new types of villager trades, but truth be told, we weren't immediately enthused to go out in search of new chunks to generate things like villager outposts. In great update to be sure, just not one of major consequence for Novaterra at the time. It did add cats though, which was awesome. Interestingly, the Village and Pillage update converted most existing villagers in our world to a new version of villager that among other things had access to new professions and behaviours. However, somewhere in the north of Novaterra still remains a single village containing the old version of villagers, which somehow haven't been converted to the post-Village and Pillage update forms. It's undoubtedly a weird glitch, likely stemming from how old our world is, but it is interesting nonetheless. In any case, that was it as far as major PS4 edition updates were concerned. Patch 1.95 would release on September 9th, 2019. A minor bug fix update, but the last update that PlayStation 4 edition would ever see. In total, PlayStation 4 edition had received around 5 years of updates. A good showing to be sure. At this point though, there were plenty of rumblings around Bedrock edition now being ported to PlayStation. It had, after all, been ported to Xbox and Nintendo Switch a year prior at this point. Suffice it to say, we were desperate for the Bedrock edition to arrive, purely because we wanted to be able to host a dedicated, persistent Realms server for Novaterra instead of having it chained to my dusty old PS4. As early as 2014 in fact, 4J was considering a Realms-like service for PlayStation 4, but here we were in 2019 and it had never arrived. Meanwhile, our console cousins on Xbox and Switch were enjoying Minecraft Realms on Bedrock Edition, the perfect solution to our woes. In late August of 2019, posts like this were popping up everywhere, supposing the Bedrock Edition for PS4 was on its way. The reason it was so severely delayed, by the way, was because Sony at the time was very against crossplay with other platforms, a core feature of Bedrock Edition and the Minecraft Realms service. In any case, Bedrock code leaks were indicating that PlayStation integration was indeed happening. At this point, it was no longer a matter of if, but when. And boy, we were excited. Unfortunately, our excitement would be met by intense disappointment upon the release of Bedrock Edition. On December 10th, 2019, that fated day arrived. Our group chat lit up with the news that Bedrock was finally arriving on PlayStation. Finally, we thought, freedom for Novaterra. At long last, it would be unshackled from the chains of my old PS4. Hosted on Minecraft Realms, Novaterra would be safe, secure, and accessible for all. Except, it wouldn't be any of those things, and the coming year would unfortunately go on to mark Novaterra's darkest ever period. So, with PS4 patch 1.99, Bedrock Edition finally arrived on PlayStation. This was Bedrock version 1.14.0, otherwise known as the Buzzy Bees update. This update would add bees and bee-related items such as honey blocks and beehives, but let's be honest here folks, that's not why we're here. The big juicy part of this update was the ability to move our PS4 edition worlds to Bedrock Edition. This would provide three main benefits. The first was day and date updates with PC. That is to say, we wouldn't need to wait months or indeed years to receive the updates that our PC cousins were already enjoying. The second benefit was infinite world sizes, meaning the days of intense diplomatic wrangling over generating new chunks were gone. Want to go and explore a bunch of new chunks for miles? Go right ahead, no one's stopping you. Finally, the third benefit of moving to Bedrock was the supposed ability to host our world on a persistent, always online Minecraft Realms server, meaning I'd no longer need to host the world myself. Let me take you through the highs and lows of that day then. The day we converted our PS4 edition world to Bedrock Edition. Upon hitting the play button in these new Bedrock Edition menus, I'd see the Novaterra save file. Clicking on it wouldn't load up the world though. Instead, this would convert the world from the legacy PS4 edition format over to Bedrock editions. Once converted, there would be two Novaterra save files. One that was the original PS4 edition save file, and the other being the new Bedrock ready version of Novaterra. At this point, I was free to delete the old PS4 edition save file and embrace Novaterra's bright new future on Bedrock. Well, I say bright, but to say this world conversion process went smoothly would be inaccurate. It failed once or twice, and even once converted, some chunks in our world had just disappeared, which impacted certain builds. This was a similar effect to what had happened during the world corruption of 2015, though not nearly as huge or as damaging. Also, all players on the server straight up lost all of their inventories and armor. For some reason, during conversion, the game failed to link our old PS4 edition inventories to our Bedrock inventories. To this day, there are so-called ghost accounts on the server that still have all of our stuff, and we just can't get it back. So our characters had to start from scratch. This was a massive pain and caused some players to quit the server for a while out of frustration. We weren't alone with these issues, by the way. Plenty of others online were struggling also. In any case, it did eventually get converted, warts and all. It's worth noting this wasn't like converting a PS3 edition save to a PS4 edition save file where the underlying save file was identical. This was more like that Java to Bedrock save file conversion I was talking about earlier, where because the formats are so different, a lot can go wrong and a lot can get lost in translation. Things were very different on Bedrock, and describing the differences between it and the PS4 edition, well, that deserves a whole video in itself. But off the top of my head, Redstone worked completely differently on Bedrock, similar to how it works completely differently on Java. Suffice it to say, all of our redstone contraptions broke. Minecarts on Bedrock Edition were also a lot slower, like a lot slower. Additionally, certain biomes would no longer generate, or they'd be different on Bedrock Edition. For example, in the PS4 Edition's Nether, there was a biome where netherwort would naturally grow on soul sand. In Bedrock Edition, such a thing doesn't exist. Adding to that, overworld biomes on Bedrock were a lot bigger, and structures were a lot more rare. Owing to the PS4 Edition's limited world size, biomes were typically smaller, and things like woodland mansions could often be found within 1 or 2,000 blocks of spawn. For comparison, woodland mansions on Bedrock Edition might not appear until 10 or so thousand blocks from spawn. Following on from the point that Bedrock world generation was different to PS4 editions, well, this led to some rather sharp terrain differences between generated chunks on both versions. I mean, you need only look at a map to see that Bedrock's world generation contrasted heavily with PS4 editions. Also, like I said, the world size was now infinite. This applied to the Nether also, where similar sharp terrain differences would appear. Interestingly, as a result of the new infinite world sizes, that bedrock wall that kept us from generating more chunks than we were allowed to on PlayStation disappeared on Bedrock. Well, I say disappeared, oddly enough if you go looking you can find some remnants of that bedrock wall that weren't deleted. Little random blocks of bedrock can still be found floating in the Nether. You can also find massive walls of netherrack that originally were made of bedrock. Honestly, that looks pretty cool. Slime chunks completely changed too. Dedicated slime farms in our PS4 edition world straight up didn't spawn slimes on Bedrock edition. Slimes were also super rare on PS4 edition as I recall. On Bedrock edition, at least to me, they seem pretty common. Finally, entity limits were essentially removed. On PS4 edition, one world could only hold so many wolves, chickens, pigs and other sorts of animals. This meant that if someone built a massive animal farm, it could prevent other players from doing the same. The game would prevent you from spawning more animals than it could handle. Thankfully, Bedrock Edition removed this cap. These are just a few of the changes that we noticed on the move to Bedrock, but suffice it to say, it felt like a completely different game, for better or for worse. The biggest issue with this move? Well, we were happy to take all of the glitchiness and differences of Bedrock Edition, we thought, if it meant we could get access to realms, except we didn't get realms with this update. In fact, we wouldn't get realms for a whole year. One can only imagine this was to do with Sony's troubled stance on crossplay at the time, but good lord, now we were saddled with a, and I'm just going to say it, worse and much less stable version of the game, and we didn't even get the realms payoff that we were looking for. Believe me, myself, my brother, and indeed a good chunk of the PlayStation Minecraft community petitioned Mojang to release realms, or at the very least, for an update as to a release timetable, but we effectively just got silence. But what's wrong with hosting the server the way you used to, I hear you ask? Well, firstly, I was sick of using my PS4 as a dedicated server at this point, and secondly, because Bedrock would crash 2 to 3 hours into any hosting session. I could leave the world running for others to join, but it would always crash mere hours into the session, and worse still, the world would then corrupt beyond repair, and we'd need to restore a backup save, losing hours of progress. Hell, Bedrock would crash even when I was playing solo. This was horrible. The game felt worse to play, everyone's inventories were wiped, and so too was their investment in the world, and no one had confidence in playing anymore due to the crashes. For the year until Realms would finally release on PlayStation in late 2020, Nova Terra would basically die. No one wanted to waste time on builds that would be wiped by corrupted saves, and the game felt so different that it genuinely just alienated a lot of us. During this year, on June 23rd, 2020, the Nether update would release. This would be an awesome update, totally revamping the Nether with new biomes and mobs and adding netherite armor and gear to the game. Like I say though, Novaterra was on life support at this point, so we would only begin to explore the fruits of this update for ourselves in 2022. As you seen earlier, our existing Nether was generated in 2015, so only by travelling outward from the Nether's spawn region would you be able to avail of all this cool new stuff. For example, if you went looking for netherite, you wouldn't find any in the spawn region of our Nether, you'd need to go further out. This update would also prompt the creation of a Nether highway system in Novaterra, which made travelling long distances in the overworld much easier. Thankfully, a few months later we would finally get Realms. Bedrock version 1.16.100 would release for PS4 edition on November 17th, 2020, adding realms and servers for PlayStation. Good lord, that took a while. Novaterra would finally be revived from its dormant state and would finally be freed from the clutches of my PS4. All I had to do was purchase a Minecraft Realms subscription, which I did on iOS because it was cheaper than PS4 for some reason, upload Novaterra to Mojang servers, and bam, finally the world was free. I would go on to create a Realm Discord and invite new members to the server who would take it upon themselves to generate new terrain in the north and the south of Novaterra and set up shop. Now, Realms wasn't perfect. Certainly during 2021 at least, there seemed to be a chronic issue of the server crashing and about 30 minutes to an hour of progress being lost. This was rare but annoying, however it thankfully stopped being an issue sometime in late 2021. Furthermore, Realms murdered the draw distance of our world. You see, to ensure adequate performance, Mojang would set a limit of 10 chunks draw distance for any world uploaded to Realms. This was as opposed to the 18 or so chunks that we enjoyed when I hosted the world on my PS4. My brother actually told me an unfortunate anecdote about this. He had built this super cool castle that you could see from a certain point in the world. When Novaterra was ported to Realms, he logged on and went to show his friends this very same castle, except he couldn't show it because it was now shrouded in fog. In any case, Realms draw distance would be boosted from 10 chunks to 12 in the middle of 2022, which would be a big improvement, but yeah. Draw distance is one of the big prices we pay for playing on Realms. On June 8th, 2021, we would get Caves and Cliffs. Wait, Caves and Cliffs? That big update that adds the deepest of caves and the highest of cliffs? Oh wait, this is only part 1. The part that doesn't include, the actual caves and cliffs. Oh. This update would add certain resources and blocks like amethysts, azalea trees, copper, deep slate, dripstone. Honestly, a lot of cool stuff, but we weren't interested in seeking it out until Caves and Cliffs Part 2 would release, which it would on November 30th, 2021. This was an awesome update. Caves and new chunks would now be so much cooler, with some being absolutely massive and daunting. Cliffs would pierce the sky and be super tall, and both of these things would include all the resources added in Caves and Cliffs Part 1. This update would make our world much taller and deeper, meaning that not only could we generate new chunks by walking away from spawn, but we could generate new chunks by digging down from spawn. It added a whole new dimension to our originally quite plain PS3 era spawn region. With an infinite world, there was now no need for diplomatic negotiations as to what chunks to generate. We could just do it. And that Christmas, me, my brother and our friend would do just that. We'd set out on a 5,000 block journey to find this awesome new terrain and create our biggest base yet. Like I said earlier, should you spawn in Novaterra, you'll be surrounded by old, basic Minecraft terrain. Recreate our 5,000 block hike, however, and you'll see how Minecraft has evolved its world generation from 2013 until today's Caves and Cliffs update. It's a cool indictment of just how old our world really is. It's worth noting, this update seemed to mark the end of those realms related issues I was talking about earlier, specifically the crashing and resetting of progress. After this update, I think it'd be fair to say that player count and player confidence in Novaterra was at an all-time high. We were having a bunch of fun, and the bad old days of Bedrock 2020 could be forgotten. Jumping forward, on June 7th, 2022, the Wild update would release. Coming from Caves and Cliffs, this felt more like the mild update, but I appreciate not every update can be as game-changing as the likes of Caves and Cliffs and the Nether updates. This update would add the mangrove swamp, mobs such as the Ally, the frog, and others. One really cool thing it would add though would be the ancient city and its scary warden inhabitant. A super interesting thing about ancient cities generating in Novaterra is that they generate in totally different spots than you'd expect in a typical Bedrock or Java world today. For example, look up any guide on YouTube that tells you how to find ancient cities and they'll all tell you to look for big giant mountains. ancient cities typically generate below them. In Novaterra's rather quaint PS3 era spawn region though, an ancient city would generate smack bang below Valhedge, right below my old PS3 era Taiga base in fact, where the 2015 corruption occurred. The combination of an ancient city appearing below such a cursed, corrupted area of our world was super awesome and would give us lots of lore ideas to play with, which I'll elaborate on in part 2 of this video. It would be December of 2022 before we'd explore that ancient city as a server, but man, it was super fun. This was a great addition to Minecraft and I hope Mojang plays more with adding these sorts of high risk areas in the future. So that's it as far as the Bedrock era of Novaterra is concerned. At least so far. It had an immensely shaky start, but with the great updates since, both in terms of features and stability, Novaterra is as big and as popular as ever. We now look forward to Novaterra's 10th birthday this year, which will coincide with 2023's big Minecraft update to come. The technical history of Novaterra, its world generation and all the clients it's been hosted on and converted between, make it an immensely unique world today. Even if I gave you the seed for this world, which you can have by the way, it would generate completely differently to how it did back then. This is owed not only to world generation updates, but the limits of previous Minecraft platforms and the lifting of said limits. It's been a pleasure to document the technical history of this world, and personally, it's been super interesting. Now we move to the second part of this video, the extensive and deep player created lore of Novaterra. Welcome to the story of Novaterra. Now, this video has ran on a bit longer than I had anticipated, and part of the fun of crafting lore is leaving stuff to the imagination, allowing space for your own interpretation of the world. For those two reasons, this section of the video will be a lot shorter than the first, and will focus on covering a high-level history of the world, as the players understand it. I won't go into explicit detail as to the history of each player and each nation state, but I will offer just enough depth so that you can get a flavour of the history of our world. It also won't be narrated like the rest of this video, as I don't think my voice would do some of this cool lore justice. Maybe if I sounded more like Morgan Freeman, I'd think differently. That being said, if, after this section, you guys are especially keen on seeing more lore to do with this world, do let me know. I'm sure an extended Novaterra lore video isn't out of the question, should the demand be out there. For now though, enjoy the final part of this video, and thanks for exploring 10 years of Novaterran history with me.